What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 15. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over each position and break down a couple of my favorite players for this NFL DFS main slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, NFL Week 15, let's take a look at the quarterback position. So at the top end in quarterbacks, I do like Lamar Jackson. I'm not going to go over him here in this video, but I think he's a great play here. He's got a fantastic matchup. It's a game that he needs to win. He's been on fire. You got to spend up for him, but he's got major upside. So I like Lamar Jackson here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. But the other quarterbacks that I like this week, I like Kyler Murray from the Arizona Cardinals playing the Philadelphia Eagles, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Kyler Murray has averaged 26.8 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's getting an average of 8.9 rush attempts per game. He got 13 rush attempts last game, so I like that rushing upside that he gives you. He's going to be about 11% owned, projected at 22.6 fantasy points here in Week 15. He's 7,000 DraftKings salary and 1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, with the Cardinals favored by 6. So decent matchup here. And Vegas has this game much closer than I expected. Pretty high scoring game here. So I like Kyler Murray here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Another quarterback I like is Tom Brady from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 8th worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Tom Brady has averaged 21.4 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's only going to be about 5% owned, projected at 23.4 fantasy points here in Week 15. He's 6,600 DraftKings salary and 1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game. They have the Bucks favored by 6. So a fantastic matchup here. The Bucks need to win this game. I think Tom Brady steps it up. I think he gets 4 touchdowns in this game. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks on the slate. So I like Tom Brady here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Another quarterback that I like is Jared Goff from the LA Rams playing the New York Jets, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Jared Goff has averaged 19.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.3 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 7% owned, projected at 19.4 fantasy points here in Week 15. He's 6,300 DraftKings salary and 1,500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43.5 points scored in this game, with the Rams favored by 17.5. So this is a fantastic matchup for Jared Goff. Some people might be scared away by that low point total, and also the fact that the Rams are expected to blow out the Jets. Maybe people think this is going to be a running game script, and Jared Goff isn't going to have to throw the ball much in this game. But the New York Jets are good at stopping the run. So just like last week, where Russell Wilson had 4 touchdowns versus the Jets, I think Jared Goff can get there as well. So I like Jared Goff here versus the New York Jets. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So you got the salary in your lineup. Derrick Henry is a smash play this week. Every time I say they're a smash play, I swear they come out and put up a dud. So let's hope that doesn't happen. But Derrick Henry, he's got a fantastic matchup this week. The Detroit Lions give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing running backs. He's $9,500 DraftKings salary and $700 more on FanDuel. So if you got the salary in your lineup, make sure to get some exposure to Derrick Henry. He's got that 40 fantasy point upside. So I like Derrick Henry here versus the Detroit Lions. Another running back that I like is Jonathan Taylor from the Indianapolis Colts playing the Houston Texans, who have the third worst defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Jonathan Taylor has averaged 15.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 14 rush attempts per game and 2.7 pass targets per game. But he scored 34 and 23 fantasy points in his last two games, so he's been on fire. He's going to be about 14% owned, projected at 16.4 fantasy points here in week 15. He's $7,200 DraftKings salary and $200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Indianapolis Colts favored by 7.5. So you got a fantastic matchup, a high-scoring game, and a running game script. So I like Jonathan Taylor here versus the Houston Texans. Another running back I like is Cam Akers from the LA Rams playing the New York Jets, who have the second worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Now, I know I just said that the Jets have a good defense versus the run, and that's true. But if you're not going to play Jared Goff and you want to go with the running game script of the LA Rams, assuming they're going to get the lead over the Jets and then run the ball to run out the clock, Cam Akers, he scored 24, 16, and 14 fantasy points in the last three games, and he got 29 and 21 rush attempts in his last two games. So he's getting a ton of volume. He's going to be about 22% owned, projected at 14.3 fantasy points here in week 15. He's $6,600 DraftKings salary and $100 more on FanDuel. So I like Cam Akers here versus the New York Jets. Okay, now one of my favorite running backs on the slate, with Ronald Jones out, I like Leonard Fournette from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 8th worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing running backs, Leonard Fournette is going to get the start. He's going to be the feature back here with Ronald Jones out this week. He's going to be about 21% owned because he's only $4,500 DraftKings salary. He's projected at 13.4 fantasy points here in week 15. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Bucks favored by 6. So it could end up being a running game script. Leonard Fournette could get a ton of work here. So I like Leonard Fournette here versus the Atlanta Falcons.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. I like Robert Woods from the LA Rams playing the New York Jets, who have the second worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Robert Woods has averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.2 pass targets per game. So I know I gave you Jared Goff and Cam Akers, but if you're not going to play Cam Akers and you want to go with Jared Goff, I think Robert Woods makes a nice stack with Jared Goff here. Look, we know Jared Goff is going to throw for a few touchdowns in this game, so it's going to be either Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods. But Robert Woods is getting more pass volume. He got 8, 11, and 12 pass targets in the last 3 games versus Cooper Kupp, who's only got 5, 9, and 5 pass targets in the last 3 games. So Robert Woods is going to be about 13% owned, projected at 16.7 fantasy points here in week 15, and he's 6,800 DraftKings salary and 600 more on FanDuel. So I like Robert Woods here versus the New York Jets. Okay, another wide receiver that I like, saving some salary here, I like T.Y. Hilton from the Indianapolis Colts playing the Houston Texans, who have the 3rd worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. T.Y. Hilton has averaged 11.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.1 pass targets per game. But take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 26, 28, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 7, 11, and 5 pass targets. He's going to be about 8% owned, projected at 14.4 fantasy points here in week 15, and he's 5,500 DraftKings salary and 1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Colts favored by 7.5. So great matchup here. He's been on fire, so I like T.Y. Hilton here versus the Houston Texans. Okay, so this next wide receiver, I was a little bit down on this guy earlier in the week. I actually had him as a sit in my starts and sits videos, but for daily fantasy, because of his low salary, I like CeeDee Lamb from the Dallas Cowboys playing the San Francisco 49ers, who have a good defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb has averaged 13.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.1 pass targets per game. He's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here in week 15, and he's only 4,500 DraftKings salary and 1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game, with the Cowboys trailing by 3. So at first glance, it doesn't appear that he has a good matchup, but when you dig into the cornerback wide receiver matchups for this week, CeeDee Lamb actually has a good cornerback matchup. So I think he actually makes a great daily fantasy play because of his low salary, his low ownership, and his favorable cornerback matchup here. So I like CeeDee Lamb here versus the San Francisco 49ers. Okay, let's take a look at the tight end position. This is one of my favorite plays on the slate. I like Mark Andrews from the Baltimore Ravens playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have the worst defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Mark Andrews has averaged 12 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 13% owned, projected at 14.2 fantasy points here in week 15, and he's 5,500 DraftKings salary and 1,300 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Baltimore Ravens favored by 13. Fantastic matchup. The Ravens need to win this game. I think they're going to smash the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I think Mark Andrews is going to be a big part of that. So I like Mark Andrews here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Another tight end I like is T.J. Hawkinson from the Detroit Lions playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. T.J. Hawkinson has averaged 12.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.8 pass targets per game. But take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 16, 15, and 14 fantasy points off of 11, 9, and 8 pass targets. And he's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 12.1 fantasy points here in week 15. He's $5,200 DraftKings salary and $1,000 more on FanDuel. So Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Detroit Lions trailing by 11.5. So pretty good matchup here, high scoring game, and a passing game script. So I like TJ Hawkinson here versus the Tennessee Titans. Okay, and if you want to save some salary at the tight end position, take a look at Logan Thomas from the Washington Redskins playing the Washington football team playing the Seattle Seahawks, who have the 8th worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. Logan Thomas has averaged 9.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.9 pass targets per game. Take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 10, 25, and 13 fantasy points off of 7, 9, and 4 pass targets. And he's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here in week 15. And he's only $4,000 DraftKings salary and $1,600 more on FanDuel. So I love that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43.5 points scored in this game, with the Washington football team trailing by 6.5. So you got a passing game script. So I like Logan Thomas here versus the Seattle Seahawks.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.